Aloha, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I want to thank you for calling what I think is an extremely important hearing. I want to welcome our witnesses and to recognize all of the veterans and their family members who have joined us here today for this hearing. I also want to give special welcome to two North Carolinians, Jerry Ensminger and Shelley Perulis, and to thank them for their tireless leadership and advocacy on behalf of the veterans and their families. Your interest in this hearing only serves to underscore the importance of the issues we're discussing today. Over the years, thousands of military personnel and their families have been exposed to dangerous chemicals where they were living and working while serving our country. Today, we'll hear from some of those exposures, including the plumes from an incinerator near a base in Japan, smoke from burn pits being used in Iraq and Afghanistan, dust from a facility in Iraq coated with a known carcinogen, and contaminated drinking water at a base in North Carolina. I want to express my sincere appreciation to the veterans and family members on our first panel for your willingness to share with us your painful experiences about that exposure. Your perspective will help guide our efforts to find answers for veterans across the country about how these exposures may have affected their health or the health of their loved ones. More importantly, your testimony will help us determine what steps we need to take to protect and improve the lives of those who have been harmed. Mr. Chairman, my remarks will focus on one exposure issue that's very personal to me: the contaminated drinking water at Camp Lejeune in my home state of North Carolina. I know we'll hear from several witnesses about this issue, but I also would like to acknowledge two former Marines, Jerry Ensminger, who's here today, and David Briscoe, who could not be here today. They both lived at Camp Lejeune during the years that the water was contaminated and have their own painful stories. David, who lived in Camp Lejeune in the 1980s, was later diagnosed with cancer of the hard palate and underwent treatment that reduced his ability to eat, speak, and work. Jerry's daughter, who was born at Camp Lejeune in 1975, was diagnosed with leukemia at age 6 and tragically died 3 years later. Jerry, I commend you for your personal strength in the face of such tragedy and appreciate you being here today. Unfortunately, Jerry and David's heart-wrenching stories are not unique for veterans who served on Camp Lejeune between 1957 and 87. The residents of Camp Lejeune didn't know it at the time, but the water they were drinking, cooking with, and bathing in contained harmful chemicals, including TCE, PCEs, benzenes, and vinyl chloride, which are known or probable human carcinogens. Some of them are now living with rare cancers, like one of our witnesses today. Mark Partain is the son of a Marine, a former resident of Camp Lejeune, and one of over 20 former Lejeune residents diagnosed with a rare male breast cancer at an unusually young age. He was just 39 years old. This condition usually strikes less than 2,000 men each year, and most are over the age of 55. Although a number of studies have suggested a possible link between the water at Camp Lejeune and these types of conditions, we still don't have the answers about what made Jerry's daughter, or Mike, or David sick, or what's caused our former Lejeune residents to become ill. The government's role in scientific discovery is clear. Camp Lejeune was designated by the EPA as a National Priority List site. Under Title 42 of the U.S. Code, the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry is conducting a number of studies of the Camp Lejeune contamination. These studies include sophisticated computer modeling and future mortality and health surveys. It's unfortunate that ATSDR was not invited to provide a witness for this hearing so that they could respond to testimony being given by our witnesses and answer questions from this committee. Mr. Chairman, I hope, in order to strike a balance of the scientific opinion on what I think is an important issue, I would ask that ATSDR's official response to the National Research Council's report on Camp Lejeune be included in the record today.
Will be included in the record.
I thank the chair for that. We have an obligation to figure out how much of these dangerous chemicals veterans and their families were exposed to at Camp Lejeune and what the impact these exposures had potentially on their health. For these patriots who have endured unbearable heartache and suffering, they deserve no less than our best effort to provide them with the answers about why they're sick. Also, we must always make sure that the claims these families have pending are not prematurely denied by the government before science has had the opportunity to provide more answers. And let me stress, before science has had the opportunity. But while we wait for science, we must deal with the fact that many of these exposed veterans and their families continue to suffer from devastating conditions. It's simply not right for us to continue to tell our veterans and their families just wait for another study. They've already waited 2 decades. We owe them much more than that. That's why I've introduced, along with my colleague from North Carolina, Senator Hagan, legislation that's the Caring for Camp Lejeune Veterans Act, S-1518, which would allow veterans stationed at Camp Lejeune while the water was contaminated to get medical care from the VA. Perhaps more importantly, it would also allow the VA to treat their families for conditions associated with exposure to contaminated water. Providing health care to veterans and their families would be one step towards meeting our moral obligation to those who have put more at risk. As we'll discuss today, there are many other veterans and their families who may have been exposed to dangerous chemicals in other places around the world. For all of them, it's important that we have a framework in place to determine in a fair and hassle-free and timely manner what benefits and services they need and deserve. To that end, we'll have a candid and productive discussion today about what's currently working well and where improvements are needed. Mr. Chairman, for veterans and their families put at risk by exposure, whether in Japan, Afghanistan, Iraq, or North Carolina, we have a solemn duty to take care of those who have were put in harm's way while serving this nation. I hope we will work together, and I think we will, to provide these veterans, their families, with the answers they deserve and, more importantly, the help they need. I thank the chair.